Fired Up. I'm your host for the show, Bob Erwin. We are coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada, in the law office of Alan Butel in downtown Las Vegas here. Alan handles criminal defense, civil litigation, and is a frequent guest on Fired Up, including tonight. My landlord is here, so I gotta be nice. This show is about guns, related political issues with guns, and generally self-defense issues. We are on KSHP Radio 1400 AM. That show is broadcast from 9 to 10 in the morning on Sundays now. And so if you miss anything, you can tune it in on your way to church on Sunday morning, KSHP 1400 AM. And we are on almost exactly live on YouTube as we broadcast. There's about a 5-second delay, I think, from the time we say the word till it actually comes out on in your screen. We moved the time on the radio because of constant preemptions from Dodger baseball games and so forth. So now remember, when you're getting ready for church, if you want to hear the broadcast, turn up to 1400 AM radio. It's broadcast worldwide, and you will find Fired Up. My guest today, as I mentioned, is attorney Alan Butel. Alan, if you'd give a little bit of background, your experience.
Very little. I've been practicing law here in Las Vegas and in Nevada, including Lake Tahoe, for 30 years now, Bob, 30 years. And prior to that, I was in the Marine Corps and did other things. And so in that course of time, I've had many experiences with firearms, my own, and those handled by others in often not good situations.
And I would mention a prior Kansas state trooper.
Yes.
Alan is one of the rare attorneys that I have on that's experienced in law enforcement, has been a prosecutor, and has been a defense lawyer.
Yes.
So he looks at things from all sides, actually. Anyway, we're going to, if you need to contact us, you have a question or comment, you can send me an email to bob@firedupmail.com or leave a message on my home recorder. I listen to that at least once every 24 hours to get messages, and we'll call you back. We answer all inquiries by text. If you need to get a hold of one of our attorneys on our website, if you go to www.firedupwithboberwin.com, you will find a tab there to hit of our guest attorneys with little resumes and so forth, and how to contact them directly, and away you go. A little disclaimer in the beginning: there are several hundred defensive uses of firearms every week in the United States, often not covered by the mainstream media. So I usually start out with a few of those to kind of right the ship. Probably there's 200 cases of somebody using a firearm for self-defense every week, for every 2 or 3 that are wrongful uses of firearms. Some are good shootings, some of those are bad shootings, some are silly. I pick out ones that I think would be useful for gun owners or concealed weapon holders to file away in their background to think, what would I have done if I was in this guy's position? So normally I leave the names out of the stories, because it's what happened in the incident and the decisions that had to be made on that moment that are the issue. Fired Up is a nationwide show, actually worldwide. Where we use Nevada cases, we can simply call them as we see them, while I have an attorney on. But if you are involved in a real case, you've shot somebody and you're in trouble, or something is going on related to that, we got to remind you to get local counsel. The laws are different in every jurisdiction. Advice we're giving on this show may or may not apply in the jurisdiction you're in. It's fairly obvious to say that a shooting that might be valid in rural Nevada is not going to be valid in New York City. They look at everything differently. So with that in mind, we will give you an opinion how to hopefully keep yourself out of trouble, keep yourself out of lawsuits, and keep yourself out of jail while we're doing this. The lead story tonight is kind of warms my heart. This was carried by NBC TV and the Chicago Tribune. It started out on the 27th of I wrote the wrong year, 27th of May 2017. In Oak Park, Illinois, a 16-year-old Chicago teen was shot attempting to rob a 24-year-old Chicago man on a parking lot of a bank near Madison Avenue and Austin Boulevard. It's in the western suburb of Oak Park, which is just outside of Chicago, and they have their own police department, but it's basically a suburb of Chicago. The teenager allegedly tried to rob the man about 11:15 a.m. The robber's chosen victim was legally armed and exchanged gunfire with the young criminal. After being shot, the robber got into a waiting vehicle and drove off into the wilds of Chicago itself. He was taken to Stoker Hospital, where he was pronounced dead at 11:47 p.m. The Cook County Medical Examiner's Office relayed that. The autopsy is scheduled for Sunday, and so on and so on. The police are still investigating how the teen got to the hospital. Apparently, he had a getaway driver waiting outside. An off-duty Chicago police officer who was nearby detained the robbery victim, who was being questioned by investigators. He had a valid Illinois concealed carry permit. Police said the investigation is continuing and many details remain undetermined as yet. You know, commentary now, how could the details remain undetermined if you have a guy who is approached by a teenager with a gun? It appears to be, from all intents and purposes, a clean case of self-defense. Could this go sideways on the victim? Sure. Yeah, when you've got particularly with a juvenile.
One little thing that we don't see in the article could change the complexion of the case. If it turns out that there was a history between the two of them, just that one little thing, just that one knew the other, then that could change the complexion entirely. So who knows? But on its face, it looks like a clean case of self-defense.
It certainly does for what's available. And I've included this case. It's kind of a routine case, but the Friday before the Memorial Day weekend, a Chicago police superintendent named Eddie Johnson held a press conference and said raids on known gang members are being conducted all weekend to curb violent crime over the holiday. When he did the press conference on Friday before Memorial Day, 52 arrests had already been made. What they got is an algorithm that tells them who's likely to be involved in an illegal shooting, and they just went out and pounced on them with search warrants and got to their houses and recovered guns and arrested them. This is going after the criminals rather than Chicago's normal reaction of going after guns. And while they were doing this, they made 52 arrests on Friday evening as he was doing the press conference. And the results of this were reported by CBS in Chicago. Over Memorial Day weekend, 18 people were wounded in Chicago shootings. There were no fatal shootings since Friday evening, making this holiday weekend much less violent than last year. For comparison, last year, Memorial Day weekend, 69 people had been shot over that weekend and 6 died. The year before, in 2015, 12 people were killed and 43 wounded over the same holiday. Do we all see what's happening here? They went after the gangsters instead of the guns. Could Chicago now start going after gangsters instead of firearms that are owned by, legally or illegally in Chicago, by people who aren't gang members? Boy, if that works, and it certainly worked, maybe Chicago will be off on a new trip and actually going after criminals instead of going after guns. Wouldn't that be nice? A change of pace for Chicago. I'm going to talk a little bit. I have a couple of commercials that I always forget to do for my supporters. So I put them on pink paper so I wouldn't forget. Grant Defense, which is a company at 5580 South Decatur Boulevard. It's at the corner of Russell and Decatur. I still have Russell and Jones in my outline. Wow, no wonder I get it wrong. Anyway, Their grand opening is scheduled for June 3rd. You can call them at 702-675-3901. They are at the back door of the Dewey Animal Shelter, if you know where that is. If you go directly west of the Dewey Animal Shelter, you run into the back of their building. So while you're nearby, you can adopt a dog or a puppy to bark when people come. What they do at Grant Defense is they build their own line of AR-15s and some really amazing versions of Glock 19s and Glock 17s that are, you got to see them to believe them. Try to get over there if you can on their opening June 3rd. I'm going to try and be there in the afternoon for that, and you'll see some amazing guns. Grant Defense, 5580 South Decatur Boulevard. They have a website, I believe it's on Facebook, Grant Defense. The Virginian pilot, it's actually called pilotonline.com, reported on 5/26 in Norfolk, Virginia. Sad story. A 24-year-old tugboat deckhand was shot dead in Ocean View, was pointing a gun as the killer trying to stop a robbery, his brother said. The victim had been hanging out with some neighbors at his apartment building in the 9,000 block of First View Street when a woman came up to the group and asked to use someone's phone. They told her they didn't have one she could use. The victim, suspicious of the woman might be casing the place, ran back to his apartment, got a handgun, and returned to his neighbor's house. After coming back, a man wearing a bandana pointed a gun at them. So the victim took aim at the would-be robber and ordered him to put his gun on the ground. The man seemed to comply, and by slowly lowering the gun. Then he jerked it up and fired, hitting the victim, this good Samaritan, with his gun in the stomach. Ultimately, what happened is 4 adults and 1 juvenile are charged with second-degree murder and using a gun to commit the crime. Those arrested are 21 and 22-year-old male subjects, an 18 and 20-year-old female, as well as a 17-year-old who's unidentified because he's a juvenile. The victim's brother got a good look at the shooter's face, and even though it was covered with a bandana, he took a look at the mugshots of the 4 adults, so we assume the 17-year-old was the actual shooter. This is always a tactical problem in self-defense. You have somebody with a gun and you give them a warning, gives your opponent a chance to surrender or flee. You actually expect bad guys when you pull your gun and say, drop the gun or get on the ground or run away, whatever. You wish to give them a chance. So you try to. In this case, the guy came up with a gun and killed this young man who was pointing a gun at him at the time. This has to do with reaction speed. Suggestion, obviously, is if you're going to want to give the guy a warning who's trying to rob you, try to do so from cover. There's always a chance you give him your wallet, he's going to shoot you anyway. And most of them don't, but many of them do, just to eliminate witnesses. This shooting is for a minor crime. I mean, they're shooting people because they're a witness or to gain street creds, or sometimes for absolutely no reason at all. While we're at it, I need to point out that the juvenile, they believe, was the shooter. They will commonly do that in gang stuff because the juvenile system, if they're charged with a crime, they get a lesser sentence. They're moving to charge this guy as an adult. That's going to be fought in court to see, he has no criminal history, This is his very first murder. I can hear it all now. But usually when there's a group like that, if one of them is going to be the shooter, it's going to be the youngster, the one you expect least, because he's treated differently by the system. And that's something I always wonder about. Alan, what do we do with juveniles?
Well, in this case, if it happened in Nevada, you would certify him as an adult. He would automatically be certified as an adult. There wouldn't be any separate hearing for it anymore. And you'd proceed to hammer his ass. The
Well put.
the one thing that I would say is if you pull a firearm and you're pointing it at somebody, the next thing you should do is shoot it. I mean, there's just really no reason to delay. You are, I mean, as this story so well illustrates, do not hesitate. Train and be ready to pull the trigger.
It's a tactical decision. You know, nobody out there watching this program hopefully wants to shoot anybody, and you really want to not have to shoot. And
it's not a game. If you pull that firearm out, it's deadly force. Use it.
Yeah, those rules,
otherwise, don't pull it out.
The rules you're thinking of in our civilized world don't apply in his world.
Right.
They simply don't. There's a commercial here for the law office of Alan Butel. We know about that. Free consultation, criminal and civil defense, 702-319-7800. One of my regular on-air attorneys, right there.
That's a nice.
This story is too hard to believe, so I just threw it in as ridiculous stuff. This is from USA Today, which is obviously part of the mainstream media. And in Jackson, Mississippi, the story headline on USA Today reads, "She's in jail for dropping her purse because a gun inside it went off." When you read a headline like that, obviously this is some fool with a gun, and another gun owner who did something stupid. Well, let me tell you what goes beyond that headline. The 50-year-old woman from Philadelphia, Mississippi, was in Lakeland Family Medical Center on the University of Mississippi Medical Center campus when she had a mishap. The woman dropped her purse and the gun inside it discharged. Another woman waiting in the doctor's office was wounded by the bullet. An ambulance transported the victim, whose name was not released, to a nearby hospital's emergency room, and her leg wound is not believed to be life-threatening. Well, isn't that nice? Mississippi is one of the most permissive gun laws across the USA. This is according to USA Today, allowing persons constitutional carry privileges of having a concealed firearm without a state-issued permit. However, the building where the incident took place had signs outside forbidding firearms on the premise. That's fairly common with medical facilities, right? However, this they've also put in the article at the end. She's charged with 3 misdemeanors, the woman who dropped the purse: possession of a stolen firearm, carrying a concealed weapon, and simple assault, according to the jail website. Campus police arrested the shooter and booked her into the Hinds County Detention Center. Only the mainstream media, this is my commentary now, would present such a story as another victim shot in a gun accident. Later in my paraphrase story above, U.S. News points out the woman's is a prohibited felon with a stolen firearm. No doubt this was also a posted gun-free zone. I couldn't determine that, but it likely was because it's on the campus of the university. You just read the headlines and you think another idiot gun owner. When you read the article, you discover the woman is a multiple felon, has an illegal gun, illegally carried. The other thing that occurred to me in this, having been around guns for 35 or 40 years, what kind of gun fires when it's dropped inside a purse? It goes on. There's probably way more to this story than is on USA Today's report. But this isn't a what can you do about this type of thing like we normally do on our things. It was just so slanted to read she's in jail after dropping her purse because a gun went off. Well, that's what caused attention to her. She's a multiple felon with a stolen gun.
Well, this plays into the media's appetite for just saying guns are bad. Because in this case, it was the gun itself that shot. See, guns are just bad, Bob. Doggone it.
I should realize that if I read USA Today and nothing else, I would believe that. Yeah.
It wasn't the fact that a felon and a prohibited person was carrying a stolen firearm in her purse, and she had fortunately, I mean, it went off and and exposed her for the criminal that she was, if you want to look at the silver lining. So in this case, the gun saved the day, yes?
You wonder, because when we look at these cases, we all realize they never end. I mean, things go on and on. Will the woman who is hit now sue the shooter or the gun manufacturer because it's obviously defective, or
I would say you'd want to include
the medical
the purse manufacturer, because there could have been a defect within the purse that caused the purse to discharge the firearm. I mean, for God's sake, you don't want to forget that. That's another deep pocket.
I look forward to finding out if we ever can, because nobody was killed. There'll probably be no follow-ups on this. But what I'd like to do is then find the type of purse, find the type of gun, load it, and drop it a couple of hundred times with a blank in it, of course, to see if it actually goes off. Because I can't imagine what kind of gun would go off if you dropped it in a purse. I think there's way more to the story, but they left out a lot of it anyway. So there we are. We always are talking commercial gun, talking about training. And if you keep or carry a firearm, you need to learn the rules and practice the safety rules and the rules of engagement. Where I used to work at the gun store, for those of you who don't know, I'm retired from there now. They still offer their concealed carry classes every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday. I think they charge $75 for the initial class. That includes everything, your target and your ammo and so on. And it's $55, I believe, for the renewal class. The renewal class is the first half of the regular class. So you can go on the gunstorelasvegas.com and sign up online for the classes, or call them at 702-454-1110. It is a good class. There's lots of classes around town.
Bob, does that $55 for the renewal include the ammunition?
Yes.
Well, that's not too bad. So
target, ammo, etc.
So that's
Rangemaster, eyes and ears. I was amazed when there are places where you sign up for CCW and then charge you extra for the earphones and charge you extra for safety glasses.
Yeah.
And I went, what are we doing here? It includes the cost, everything.
That's not bad.
Except the fees from the government for issuing you the concealed weapon permit, which is, I think, $97 right now. There's another issue about the government charging you to carry a concealed weapon when the Constitution says you have a right to keep and bear arms. But that's for another story.
Oh, and by the way, just so you know, I went in to renew mine. I waited a little bit longer than I should have. I think I went to renew in early February, and I received my permit about a month ago. So it didn't take that 120 days, I don't think.
No, they're running a little faster than they're telling you now when you go. You sign a document that says you realize it'll take 120 days, so you can't yell at them. But actually, they're getting more efficient. I don't have a problem with them wanting to look into your background issue of concealed carry permit. When we change that law, it'll be even better. But they're getting better, and they're doing the best they can. The police department is shorthanded, as we all know, and they are trying to keep this going as a public service. They reduced the fees like $1.50 this year because they discovered they didn't need quite that much money, which kudos to Sheriff Lombardo for that. But it's running efficiently, but the only place you can do it now is at the main police building, 400 Martin Luther King. So anyway,
goes pretty quick.
It's pretty quick. It's not like going to the DMV to renew your license. When I get that's a lot faster. Of course, I understand they're trying to do better too. They're back with the appointments now, I guess. This is from the Telegraph in Macon, Georgia, on the 23rd of this month. A robber stole a Macon resident's wallet. The victim was working on his truck Saturday afternoon in the 2200 block of Gray Highway north of Walnut Creek in Graham, if you know where that is, if you're in Macon, Georgia. He told responding officers he was robbed shortly after 2 p.m. A male subject in sunglasses with a rag hiding his face and another rag wrapped around his hand walked up behind him near a vacant building. The robber said, "You know what this is," and held out his wrapped hand as if it had a gun underneath the wrapping, representing he had a weapon. The victim gave the robber his wallet. Then he pulled a 9mm handgun out, according to the Bibb County Sheriff's report. The report says the robber then turned and fled. At some point during this, the intended victim fired about 4 shots at the robber. One would think they would know how many right off the bat, but anyway. Responding sheriff's deputies found the wallet about 100 feet away. The thief either dropped or tossed the wallet. It didn't appear the robber was wounded. That means there was no blood at the scene. The robber apparently escaped cleanly, not being hit. This incident hinges on the fine details of the timing, which is apparently being investigated. Firing at a subject who is simulating a gun and announcing a robbery is risky, but that's certainly reasonable. When a robber alludes to having a weapon, it is absolutely prudent to believe him and protect yourself. Whether he did or not may become an issue, but the shooting is valid in every jurisdiction I'm aware of. If the guy walks up and pretends to have a gun, believe him. The use of lethal force against a fleeing guy does not meet, of course, the "I was in fear of death or serious injury" standard that most jurisdictions use. I'm not entirely up to speed on Georgia law, so I will leave that to the people who will write after this is published on Animal Land. Obviously, you need to be in fear of death or great bodily harm when you use your gun. The shooter did say he stayed near the building for cover in case the subject fired back at him. That's a good tactic, because fleeing criminals often will fire a round over their shoulder or spin and fire around to discourage somebody pursuing. So this indicates to me that the guy was a fairly rational person. So I tend to think he fired when the guy was still there in the immediate thing of the robbery, and the guy simply tossed the wallet so nobody would continue chasing him. We'll find out, but this is one of the issues we always have in the timing of this event. The whole thing probably took 1.5 seconds, maybe 2 seconds. And the issue will be when those shots were actually fired. Were they part of the continuing action? Or had the guy clearly run and then the shooter fired? From his comments about using cover, I tend to think they were fired right on the spot. But we'll follow up if we can.
It's got to be very difficult to be the victim of a robbery, believing, whether it's true or not, believing that the assailant has a firearm. Giving up your personal property, being in fear for your life, and then suddenly, within this second or two, the guy just starts running away. It's got to be an incredible urge to pull out your piece and shoot him. Incredible. In fact, it has to be almost irrepressible.
It's a
the
reflex.
urge. It's a reflex. Yes, to shoot this miserable prick, and you just can't do it.
Yeah.
You can't do it. You have to just not do it.
I know you've seen cases like this, and I've done a couple of them as an expert witness, and you try and explain to the jury how the perception is of the time element, and you're still reacting to what's going on. And did you realize the guy was actually 10 feet away when you fired? Or, of course not. You're reacting. And unless it's clear that the guy was 100 feet away, threw the wallet, went in, and then you shot him, you got a different case. It's all in the timing and all in the witnesses. And this is one of the types of things I like to tell people to remember. When the officers arrive, say, you know, I'm really messed up right now. This just happened. I think I just might have killed a guy, and da, 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 da. I'd like to just stop and talk to a lawyer before I make a statement. Because in that state of mind, you're liable to say something that is part of your perception that really wasn't true. Right?
It's the same thing. It's the same urge that you have when you want to shoot the guy. Don't talk. Don't shoot the guy. Just don't. Just stop. Think about things, especially when it comes to shooting off your mouth.
Am I in danger right
once
now?
you've shot the gun, you definitely need to unload your mouth.
And
right?
Yeah, and they want to explain it to the first guy in uniform. Sometimes it's a postal guy, it's a mailman. Why they're right, and your brain will just throw out stuff that may or may not have actually happened because you're in a very confused, very hostile state. Dummy up. A friend of mine, a commercial, Jerry Creed, he's another attorney, doesn't appear on the show. He does firearm trust and class 3 firearms trust and elder law. Free consultation. He's out in Summerlin. 702-806-7777. He got a really cool phone number.
Yeah,
if you are in where you want to get a firearms trust or a class 3 trust, the laws are changing momentarily. There's bills in Congress to allow silencers to be off the list. We've got these now Mossberg and Remington shotguns with 14-inch barrels, which aren't class 3s because they're 26 inches long with a funny looking pistol grip that extends it a little bit. What is and is not a class 3, how they're transferred is in an incredible flux. If you have a firearms trust, particularly a class 3 trust, you might want to call Jerry Creed and have him take a look at what you're doing to make sure it's current, because the laws are dramatically changing. You don't do firearms trust. Okay, so I'm not competing with you.
I trust firearms, but I don't do the trusts.
You know what? I didn't set my clock for. It's still sitting on set the time, so I don't know how long we've been on the air. But I'm sure my wife will send me a text.
We started
about 10 minutes after.
About 45 minutes, 40 minutes ago.
Something like that. Okay. CBS TV in Los Angeles. This is a report from May 27, a few days ago. In Arcadia, California, a male individual was walking along the sidewalk on First Avenue, just south of Colorado Boulevard. I know the area. When he was attacked from behind by 3 teenage boys, Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reported. The incident happened just after 8 in the evening, dark. One of the suspects hit the victim in the head several times while another pointed a handgun and demanded his property. Turns out the chosen victim here was an off-duty U.S. Customs and Border Protection officer. Whoops. Sheriff spokesman Deputy Caroline Rodriguez said the victim thought the subjects were going to rob and shoot him, so he retrieved his department-issued handgun, and the victim now shot at the suspects in an effort to defend himself. One of the 2 teenage suspects shot by the officer died from his injuries. That 15-year-old robber was pronounced dead shortly after 5 in the morning at a local hospital. His 14-year-old partner also suffered gunshot wounds but was expected to survive. A third teen, also 14 years old, fled when the shooting started and was in custody following the incident. The officer was not shot but did suffer bruising to his head and face during the attack. He was treated at the scene and then released. The officer works at the San Francisco International Airport and lives in Arcadia. The suspects' names were not released because they're all juveniles, 2 14-year-olds and a 15-year-old. Here we have another case of a group of young criminals picking the wrong guy. The officer showed great restraint in not shooting all 3, if you want my opinion. No one really wants to shoot at children, but the decision there is made, do you risk your own life? This guy got hit, got banged up before he drew his gun and fired again, but he survived. No one wants to shoot at children. It's a valid shooting any way you look at it. The hitch in this one is besides the investigation by the coroner's office and the Arcadia Police Department, it was announced in the story, the Customs and Border Patrol Office of Professional Responsibility says it is working closely with the investigating agencies. I have no doubt, to be sure, their policies were not violated by the victim in his self-defense shooting with a department-issue gun, because they have their own standards, of course, and I certainly hope they recognize the ability to use self-defense when you're off duty. Maybe it's the only gun he owns, is the one that he's carrying for duty use. Hopefully, Customs and Border Patrol will understand what happened here, and he won't be not criminally charged in the shooting, but then he'll be relieved of his job, which I suspect, Alan, if he is disciplined by ICE, that'll open the door for a lawsuit because he wasn't acting within parameters, says this giant government agency. Right? Wouldn't that be something that a lawsuit lawyer would jump on?
Yeah.
And he's a federal officer, so they're going to take him right into federal court.
Outside the scope of
It's out of scope of his duties.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, his duty isn't to.
What is his theory? That he was entitled to defend himself, but not with that gun?
I can't imagine what the theory. I just seeing this, as I look at these cases.
In the long run, that ultimately dies a horrible death.
I would.
Nothing stops frivolous pettifoggers from bringing these types of offensive actions, but like I said, ultimately it would die a horrible death on a court.
But are they?
Yeah.
Are the department going to defend him? Or
well, and of course, the mistake that the pettifogger makes is probably if he pushes it too hard, then he loses the insurance company. He loses any hope of having a deep pocket. Because,
well, yeah,
your agent is your agent is just going to be a normal guy without deep pockets, and there's nothing that the plaintiff's attorney is going to be able to get from that.
Well, yeah, he's
It would be stupid to argue that he's outside the scope, because then if he does that, then the guy's
then he
hanging out by
loses
himself.
suing the agency.
Sure, yes.
And the agency disavows it, and then they want him to be an agent of the government when he did this. I didn't think about that. That's why you have that law degree.
Yeah.
You have a law degree.
I went to that Holiday Inn Express.
Okay. We are, let's see. Oh, this is not a bad story. We are the Troy News, that's in West Milton, Ohio, reported on the 29th of this month, a couple days. A burglar found himself with 3 gunshot wounds after breaking into a home in the 4600 block of Kessler Frederick Road early Monday morning. According to Miami Sheriff's Department Lieutenant Ed Lachey, a call came in from a woman homeowner approximately 5 a.m. They believed someone was in their home. The woman was on the phone with 911. Her husband went to the garage and encountered a burglar. We'll presume it's an attached part of the house garage. The homeowner had a gun, was confronted by the burglar, and shot him, said the lieutenant. The male suspect was shot 2 times in the leg and once in the hand. The intruder wasn't identified. He's in Miami Valley Hospital. He's scheduled to have surgery on a shattered femur in a couple of days. No sign of forced entry. They believe the male subject entered the home through a doggy door. Got that part? He came in through a doggy door. So it's either a big doggy door or a little guy, one or the other. The lieutenant added, this is the second time in a matter of months this home has been invaded, and police believe the subject could be linked to a string of these issues in the area. For several months, there have been numerous reports of suspicious activity, people lurking. I hate when people do that. Home and car break-ins in the same area. We're hoping this comes to an end now. Charges are pending and the investigation continues. One of the things I want to point out is the entry through the doggy door. This is a fairly common tactic of burglars. They'll hire a kid to do it, or use their children to do it, or their small stature. Looking for the intruder when you hear the noise is fine. He wants to make sure there's something really going on before all the 911 guys run out there. Another family member is calling 911 at the time, so that's fine. He certainly was prepared to whoever he met. He brought his gun with him. It's 5 in the morning, right? Don't lose track of that. Maybe the crime spree is ended by this homeowner if the lieutenant is right, and this is the guy that's been doing all these burglaries and so on, and lurking. Great, a fine job. A homeowner with a gun maybe ends a whole crime spree. Nice. Yeah. Any problem with going and looking for the guy? No, I don't think there's one at all. No. Let me see where we're running on time. I don't know where we're running on time. We lost our engineer, so he's not here to tell me how long we started.
We're under an hour.
We're under an hour? Good.
Yes, we are.
Associated Press, this is your story. The Kansas Supreme Court ruled in favor of 2 men who were charged with aggravated battery, but said they were acting in self-defense in stabbing or shooting other people. The High Court's ruling Friday rejected a tougher rule for determining when someone can avoid prosecution under the state's 2006 Stand Your Ground law. The Kansas Court of Appeal had ruled in each case that when someone seeks to avoid prosecution on self-defense grounds, the trial court judge must review evidence in a light most favorable to the prosecution when deciding whether a case goes to trial. The Supreme Court in Ohio, looking at these 2 cases, said no.
In Kansas,
I'm sorry. The judge must weigh evidence impartially. There's a new legal theory.
Can I say it? Can I say it?
Yes.
Duh.
If you have to prove your innocence the way the law is set up, that's clearly wrong. Looking up, the Review Journal ran a little background on this and said in only 4 of the 22 states that have stand your ground laws, mention the burden of proof. Alabama, Colorado, Georgia, and South Carolina all place it on the defendant to prove they had a legal right to stand your ground.
Well, as I was telling you before we started,
we talked on this, yeah.
Well, I think that what it is, you have a threshold requirement to meet, and you're expected to be able to carry that burden and establish that you are acting in concert with the law, and you have the right to shroud yourself with stand your ground. Once you prove that, then I think it's a rebuttable presumption that you are in good shape. And only with the most extraordinary evidence would a prosecutor be able to come after you. And I think that's a fair way to do it.
Yeah,
that's a fair way to do it.
I literally, when I read that statement, the Supreme Court said a judge must weigh evidence impartially. That's an exact quote. I laughed out loud for 10 minutes.
Well, sure, what? Yeah.
I mean, really. Anyway, California guys, look out! The Senate passed a crime bill, which the state Senate, which extends California's 1 handgun a month limitation to all firearms. The vote was 25 to 13. Welcome to the Democratic state of California. The legislation does nothing to affect criminal use of firearms, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure Californians will continue to ignore this law and risk going to jail. But now, if this passes the assembly, which is extremely likely, if you acquire any 2 firearms in the same 30-day period, you're committing a crime. I mean, half the population of California isn't going to know they're in trouble. Who reads this stuff? Me and you, when you have a case. So your neighbor comes over and says, I know you like guns. I don't. My husband died in the end. These 3 rifles, you want them? Yeah. And you just committed a crime by
What's so
receiving them.
very odd to me is I meet a lot of good people from California, and they have the same reaction to this kind of stuff as I do. Who are these
Idiots.
people that are coming up with this? And how do they stay in office, for crying out loud?
They keep getting elected by the residents of California.
Jeez,
Get out
please.
and vote. We just lost this election. Nevada got Democrats in charge of everything here too. So vote, register and vote, and get to keep your guns. There's a lot of upcoming gun shows. Next one is June 10 and 11 at Cashman. We have a table down there. We will be there at least. I'll be there on Saturday most of the day. I still have some passes for the gun show. If you want to drop me a line at that, bob@firedupmail.com, I will mail you a pass. There's a couple others further in the future in June. We'll talk about those just before they're on. Rocky Mountain's going to be in Reno, etc., and so on. We are done, I think, pretty close. Radio Leave Point, remember, is on Sunday from 9 to 10 a.m. And we're here on YouTube right now. We'll be back next week with the local attorney, Donald Green.
Donald Green?
Yes.
Donald Green?
Also licensed in California.
Attorney. I love Donald Green.
He fights losing battles. I mean, he fights like hell for everybody.
Oh, he's a martial artist when it comes to legal fighting.
You've seen him all at the gun shows. Great guy, particularly on the minutia of gun laws, and has a lot to talk about in California. And he was just up in Colorado, I understand, fighting a case on a gun law there and won. So he'll be here next week. Great guy. He just confirmed that he'll be here on the phone during this show. So we'll be back here next week with Don Green, and I appreciate you all listening to Fired Up.
Thank you for having me,
Alan. I'm glad you could make it this time.
Absolutely.
He's under the weather. He's had a long day. He showed up anyway, and I really appreciate it. The Marine in you came out. I'm not giving up.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Now we got to punch the button over there that says end broadcast.
I will do that.
You're going to try and find where that is.
I will use my technical expertise.
There should be a button on that screen that says end broadcast. Nope. No.
I see it. It's that big red sign with the white letters.